Jerusalem, July 13th, 1099. While every Crusader commander positioned their siege towers where Muslim defenders expected them, Duke Godfrey of Bouillon was still studying his 45-foot wooden behemoth at the northwest wall. His fellow nobles called it delays. They called him overly cautious. For 5 days, Saracen engineers had watched Christian carpenters assemble their tower, stockpiling 2,000 stones and positioning mangonels at that exact wall section. Bohemond of Taranto dismissed Godfrey's concerns as Byzantine foolishness. Why overcomplicate siege warfare when direct assault had worked for 30 years? Even Godfrey's own knights questioned their duke's obsession with Roman military texts instead of accepting medieval realities. Then Godfrey made his decision. As darkness fell on July 13th, he ordered his master carpenter to dismantle the 4-ton tower, move it a quarter-mile around Jerusalem's perimeter, and reassemble it at the northeast wall, all before dawn. Gerard of Avennes went pale. Medieval siege engines simply didn't move once constructed, but while other commanders slept expecting another day of bloody frontal assault, Godfrey's teams began the most audacious engineering feat in Crusader warfare. 300 men working in coordinated silence. 40 men couldn't lift the base platform, so 60 dragged it on wooden sledges, every wheel wrapped in cloth, every tool muffled. By dawn, the impossible tower stood before Jerusalem's northeast wall, where defenders had no stockpiled stones, no positioned mangonels, no interior barriers. Standard siege doctrine insisted 4-ton structures couldn't be moved. Iftikhar ad-Dawla's perfect defensive preparations now protected an empty wall section. What did Godfrey understand about modular construction, tactical mobility, and siege engineering that every medieval military expert insisted was impossible? If you value stories of medieval innovation that defied conventional warfare wisdom, make sure to subscribe. We've got more documented tactical breakthroughs worth discovering. The morning sun of July 13th, 1099, cast long shadows across the Crusader camp outside Jerusalem's walls. But Duke Godfrey of Bouillon paid no attention to the heat already building in the Palestinian air. He stood motionless before his siege tower, a 45-foot monument to medieval engineering that represented weeks of precious timber, hundreds of iron fittings, and the skilled labor of his best carpenters. The massive structure dominated the landscape at the northwest corner of the city, its oak frame rising in 4 distinct stories, each platform carefully measured to ensure the tower's height would provide exactly 3 feet of advantage over Jerusalem's 42-foot walls. For 5 days, Muslim engineers had watched from the ramparts as Christian carpenters assembled their wooden behemoth. 5 days for Iftikhar ad-Dawla, the capable Fatimid governor, to prepare his defenses with methodical precision. The Saracen commander had concentrated his best resources at this northwest section. Over 2,000 carefully stockpiled stones, each weighing between 15 and 20 pounds, positioned within easy reach of the ramparts. 3 mangonels had been calibrated for precise range, their wooden arms adjusted to hurl projectiles with devastating accuracy at the exact distance where Godfrey's tower would make contact. Most critically, interior wooden barriers had been constructed 12 feet behind the wall, creating a secondary defense line that would trap any successful assault force in a prepared killing ground. Medieval siege warfare followed predictable mathematics. Defenders maximized their limited resources by anticipating enemy action and preparing accordingly. Once massive wooden structures were positioned, they remained fixed. The sheer logistics of medieval engineering made relocation impossible. A siege tower weighing 4 tons, constructed from oak beams 8 inches thick and reinforced with iron brackets, simply could not be moved once assembled. This fundamental assumption governed every aspect of defensive planning. Raymond of Toulouse's chief engineer approached Godfrey as the Duke examined the tower's modular joints with unusual intensity. The grizzled veteran had overseen siege operations across southern France and understood conventional wisdom better than most. "My Lord Duke," he muttered, gesturing toward the distant wall where defenders had transformed the ramparts into a fortress within a fortress. "You cannot seriously consider that those preparations can be overcome through direct assault. They've concentrated everything at this position." The The skepticism extended throughout the Crusader leadership. Bohemond of Taranto, whose Norman forces had perfected siege warfare through 30 years of Italian campaigns, dismissed any deviation from proven methods as dangerous experimentation. His approach relied on overwhelming force applied through patient, systematic reduction of enemy defenses. Why complicate siege operations with elaborate schemes when disciplined assault and superior weaponry would eventually breach any wall? Tancred of Galilee shared these concerns, openly questioning whether Godfrey understood the brutal realities of siege warfare at all. Even among Godfrey's own Lotharingian knights, doubt festered like infection. Whispered conversations suggested their duke had spent too many hours studying ancient Roman military texts rather than accepting medieval realities. Vegetius's De Re Militari and Byzantine engineering manuals made fascinating reading, but practical siege warfare required proven methods, not theoretical innovations that could fail catastrophically. The lives of 300 assault troops hung in the balance, men who would cross that drawbridge when the tower finally reached the wall. But Godfrey possessed knowledge that his critics lacked. During the siege of Nicaea 2 years earlier, he had watched helplessly as his first siege tower, positioned conventionally and left in place for defensive preparation, had been systematically destroyed by defenders who'd had weeks to stockpile Greek fire, position artillery, and construct killing zones. The memory of burning timber and screaming men had taught him that conventional siege warfare often meant conventional slaughter. Victory belonged to commanders who solved tactical problems through engineering innovation, not to those who accepted apparent limitations as unchangeable facts. The Duke's education had included extensive study of Roman and Byzantine siege techniques, knowledge acquired through his family's trading connections with Constantinople. These texts described modular construction methods largely unknown to Western European commanders, techniques that allowed large structures to be disassembled, moved, and reconstructed without structural failure. More importantly, they emphasized tactical mobility as the key to overcoming prepared defenses. An enemy who concentrated resources at the wrong position was an enemy already defeated. As evening settled over Jerusalem's limestone walls on July 13th, casting the city in golden light that would soon give way to darkness, Godfrey made his decision. He summoned Gerard of Avsan, his master carpenter, a Flemish craftsman whose expertise extended far beyond conventional woodworking. Gerard had learned his trade in the shipbuilding yards of Bruges and Antwerp, where carpenters routinely constructed vessels designed for partial disassembly and overland transport between rivers. This naval architecture knowledge translated directly to siege engine construction, if one possessed the courage to attempt the impossible. "Gerard," Godfrey said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question, "I want the tower dismantled tonight and moved to the northeast wall, complete reassembly before dawn." The master carpenter's weathered face went pale beneath his leather cap. 30 years of construction experience had taught him to recognize the difference between difficult and impossible. "My lord, that structure weighs 4 tons when assembled. The base platform alone requires 40 men to lift, and the upper stories—" He gestured helplessly at the massive wooden framework towering above them. "Medieval engineering simply doesn't allow for such movement once construction is complete." "Then we'll prove medieval engineering wrong," Godfrey replied with calm determination that brooked no argument. "Use 80 men for the base platform if 40 isn't sufficient. Wrap every wheel in cloth strips torn from surcoats. Muffle every tool with leather bindings. If the defenders hear us moving this tower, we'll be building our own funeral pyre come morning." Gerard studied his duke's face in the fading light, searching for any sign that this was some elaborate test of loyalty rather than a genuine order. Finding only steel resolve, the craftsman began calculating the logistics required for the most audacious engineering feat in Crusader warfare. 300 men would be needed, working in coordinated silence across 4 hours of darkness. Wooden rollers would have to be positioned every 20 feet along a quarter-mile route. The tower's modular construction, designed with removable wooden pins rather than permanent iron brackets, would be tested beyond any specification he had ever attempted. As darkness finally claimed Jerusalem and other Crusader commanders, settled into their pavilions expecting another day of bloody frontal assault against prepared defenses. Godfrey's teams began preparations that would transform siege warfare forever. At midnight on July 13th, by the flickering light of oil lamps carefully shielded with leather screens to prevent detection from Jerusalem's walls, Gerard of Avicenne began the most complex disassembly operation in medieval engineering history. The siege tower's construction had followed Byzantine modular principles that Western European carpenters rarely understood. Each of the 4 fighting platforms connected through removable wooden pins rather than the permanent iron brackets typically used in Crusader siege equipment. These pins, carved from seasoned oak and fitted with leather washers to prevent metal-on-metal contact, could be withdrawn in precise sequence to separate the tower's stories without structural collapse. The engineering challenge defied conventional medieval construction methods. The top fighting platform, measuring 12 feet square and constructed from oak planks 2 inches thick, reinforced with iron corner brackets, weighed approximately 800 pounds. 16 men positioned themselves around its perimeter, their hands gripping leather straps Gerard had hastily attached to provide secure lifting points. The platform had to be lowered onto wooden rollers without creating the grinding sounds that would alert Saracen sentries barely 100 yards away on the city walls. Gerard's teams worked with the precision of naval shipwrights accustomed to dismantling vessels for river transport. Each wooden pin required careful extraction using bronze tools, wrapped in cloth to muffle any metallic sounds. The pins themselves, measuring 18 inches long and 3 inches in diameter, had been hammered into place with such precision that their removal demanded coordinated effort from multiple craftsmen working simultaneously. One pin withdrawn incorrectly could shift the entire platform's weight distribution, causing catastrophic collapse that would crush anyone positioned beneath. The second fighting platform presented greater complexity. Built to support the weight of the structure above while housing siege equipment and assault troops, it incorporated reinforced joinery that distributed loads across multiple wooden beams. This platform weighed nearly 1,200 pounds and required 24 men for safe removal. Gerard had positioned wooden sledges beneath each corner, their surfaces coated with rendered animal fat to reduce friction during the lowering process. The craftsmen moved with the methodical efficiency of men who understood that a single mistake would destroy weeks of work and potentially kill half a dozen workers. Meanwhile, specialized teams prepared the route for the tower's relocation. Every stone larger than a man's fist was removed from the quarter-mile path between the current position and the northeast wall. Wooden rollers, each cut from Lebanese cedar trees and measuring 6 feet in length with 8-inch diameters, were positioned every 20 feet along the intended track. These rollers, weighing approximately 200 pounds each, would support the massive base platform during its journey, while distributing the weight sufficiently to prevent the wooden sledge from sinking into Palestinian soil. The base platform represented the operation's greatest engineering challenge. Constructed from oak beams 8 inches thick and measuring 16 feet square, this foundation weighed nearly 2,000 pounds and incorporated the tower's most complex joinery. Iron brackets reinforced every corner connection, while wooden cross braces provided structural rigidity that allowed the entire tower to maintain stability during combat operations. 40 men could not lift such mass. Instead, Gerard's teams had constructed a specialized wooden sledge using techniques borrowed from Flemish naval architecture. This sledge incorporated principles that Western European carpenters had developed for moving ship hulls overland between rivers. Oak runners, reinforced with iron strips and coated with rendered fat, would slide across the wooden rollers while rope teams provided motive force. The sledge itself weighed 500 pounds and required precise construction to distribute the base platform's weight without structural failure. Gerard had calculated that 60 men pulling in coordinated teams could generate sufficient force to overcome friction and maintain steady movement across rough terrain. The logistics coordination demanded military precision that rivaled battlefield operations. 300 men had been organized into specialized teams, each with specific responsibilities that required timing accurate to minutes. 60 men formed the primary rope teams for dragging the base platform, their positions calculated to provide maximum pulling force while maintaining silence. 40 men carried the upper fighting platforms using leather straps and coordinated lifting techniques. 80 men managed the wooden roller system, continuously moving rollers from behind the advancing structure to extend the track ahead. Additional teams handled security and equipment management. 60 men maintained perimeter watch, positioned at regular intervals to detect any sign that Saracen defenders had noticed the operation. These guards carried no metal weapons that might reflect moonlight or create noise. Instead, they relied on wooden clubs and leather slings for silent elimination of any threats. Another 60 men managed support equipment, spare rollers, rope reserves, tools for emergency repairs, and medical supplies for treating injuries that could occur during the complex lifting operations. Every piece of metal equipment had been wrapped in leather strips or cloth, torn from surcoats to prevent the metallic sounds that would carry clearly through the night air. Wheels on supply carts received multiple layers of linen wrapping, transforming iron-rimmed wooden wheels into silent transport mechanisms. Even the men's footwear received attention. Sandals were wrapped in cloth strips, while metal buckles and fittings were bound with leather cord to eliminate any possibility of inadvertent noise. At 2 a.m, with the base platform secured on its sledge and the upper platforms loaded onto specialized carrying frames, the movement began. The base sledge carved deep furrows in the Palestinian soil as 60 men strained against rope harnesses, their combined effort gradually overcoming the massive structure's inertia. Every 30 yards, the entire operation halted while scouts verified that no sound had penetrated Jerusalem's walls to alert the defenders sleeping barely 80 yards away. The most dangerous phase came at 3 a.m, when the route passed within stone-throwing distance of the city walls. At this proximity, any significant noise would certainly alert Saracen sentries and trigger defensive preparations that would render the entire operation pointless. Godfrey himself took position at the column's head, using hand signals refined during 2 years of siege warfare to coordinate the movement. Men wrapped their sandals in additional cloth layers while breathing seemed unnaturally loud in the Palestinian night. As dawn approached on July 14th, the reassembly process began at the northeast wall position, where rocky terrain had convinced defenders that siege equipment deployment would be impractical. Girard's teams reversed the disassembly sequence with mathematical precision, raising wooden platforms in carefully calculated order, while Jerusalem's garrison remained unaware that 4 tons of siege equipment now threatened their least prepared wall section. As the first gray light of dawn on July 14th revealed the impossible sight of a fully assembled siege tower standing before Jerusalem's northeast wall, Iftikhar ad-Dawla found himself staring at the collapse of 5 days of meticulous defensive preparation. The Fatimid governor had built his military reputation through 15 years of successful fortress defense across Syria and Palestine, earning recognition as one of Islam's most capable siege commanders. His defensive philosophy emphasized mathematical precision, concentrate limited resources at predicted attack points, prepare layered killing zones behind breached walls, and force attackers to assault positions where defenders held maximum advantage through superior preparation and positioning. The tactical mathematics that had governed medieval siege warfare for centuries suddenly meant nothing. Those 2,000 carefully stockpiled stones, each selected for optimal weight and positioned within arm's reach of defenders, now sat useless at the northwest wall, while the northeast section possessed perhaps 200 hastily gathered projectiles. The 3 mangonels that his engineers had spent days positioning and calibrating for precise range at the original target remained aimed at empty ground, their wooden throwing arms adjusted for distances that no longer mattered. Most critically, the elaborate interior wooden barriers constructed with interlocking timbers and reinforced with iron brackets to create channeled killing zones simply did not exist at this new attack point. Medieval fortress defense relied on prediction and preparation because defending commanders could not match attackers in total resources. A garrison of 800 men could not simultaneously prepare every section of Jerusalem's walls with equal thoroughness. Defensive success required accurate intelligence about enemy intentions, followed by concentrated preparation at the anticipated breach point. Iftikhar's scouts had provided flawless information about Crusader siege tower construction, enabling 5 days of systematic defensive engineering that should have rendered any assault suicidal for the attackers. From the ramparts, Saracen engineers could assess the full scope of their tactical disadvantage. The siege tower's sophisticated construction incorporated design elements that demonstrated advanced medieval engineering knowledge. Its wooden sides, reinforced with iron plates salvaged from Crusader armor, would resist the fire arrows that had destroyed previous siege equipment during earlier assaults. The tower's calculated height provided exactly the advantage that siege warfare mathematics demanded. Crusader archers positioned on the upper fighting platform could shoot down onto defenders while remaining protected behind wooden mantlets, while Saracen bowmen would struggle to fire upward against gravity while exposed on the ramparts. The tower's approach positioning revealed even more devastating tactical planning. When wheeled forward to make contact with the wall, it would bridge the gap at precisely the point where Jerusalem's northeastern defenses remained unprepared for concentrated assault. No interior barriers existed to trap successful attackers in prepared killing zones. No stockpiled Greek fire waited to incinerate assault troops during their most vulnerable moments crossing from tower to wall. No concentrated archery positions had been established to create overlapping fields of fire that would decimate climbing forces. Iftikhar Adala faced strategic choices that medieval defensive doctrine had never adequately addressed. He could attempt to relocate defensive resources from the prepared northwest section to meet this unexpected threat, but such movement required time his garrison did not possess. Those 2,000 stones represented 20 tons of carefully positioned ammunition that could not be transported rapidly across Jerusalem's narrow streets. Each mangonel weighed 1,500 pounds and required teams of engineers plus hours of careful recalibration to establish effective range at new positions. The wooden barriers behind the northwest wall had been constructed with permanent joinery that made rapid dismantling and reconstruction impossible. Alternatively, he could concentrate his remaining forces at the northeast wall while abandoning the elaborate preparations that had consumed 5 days of engineering effort. This approach would leave his garrison scattered and disorganized, forced to improvise defensive measures against attackers who now possessed tactical initiative through superior positioning and preparation. Either decision would provide Crusader forces with significant advantages that conventional siege warfare mathematical models suggested should be impossible to achieve. Inside the siege tower, Godfrey's assault troops prepared for medieval warfare's most decisive moment, the escalade that would determine whether months of siege operations ended in victory or catastrophic defeat. The tower's 4 fighting levels housed different military specialists whose coordinated action would maximize the brief window of opportunity that successful wall contact would provide. Crossbowmen occupied the upper platform, their steel-tipped bolts capable of penetrating chainmail at ranges up to 60 yards. These marksmen would provide suppressing fire to prevent defenders from organizing effective resistance during the crucial moments when assault troops crossed onto the ramparts. The second level housed men-at-arms equipped with shields and 12-foot spears, designed specifically for fighting in confined spaces where sword work became impractical. These soldiers would establish the initial foothold on Jerusalem's walls, using their longer weapons to push defenders back from the contact point while protecting crossbowmen above and assault troops preparing to advance behind them. Their shields, constructed from oak planks reinforced with iron bosses, would deflect arrows and spear thrusts while their coordinated spear work created space for the main assault force to deploy. Assault troops with axes and swords occupied the third fighting level, positioned to exploit any breakthrough that the men-at-arms achieved. These veterans had survived 2 years of siege warfare across Anatolia and Syria, learning that escalade operations succeeded through overwhelming violence applied with precise timing and coordination. They carried weapons specifically chosen for wall fighting, short swords that would not become entangled in confined spaces, battle axes capable of cutting through wooden barriers, or chainmail with equal effectiveness, and reinforced helmets designed to deflect stones dropped from above. Engineers with specialized bridging equipment occupied the lowest fighting platform, ready to deploy the wooden drawbridge that would create the crucial connection between siege tower and city wall. This drawbridge mechanism incorporated counterweight systems and pulley arrangements that Gerard of Avenas had designed using principles borrowed from Flemish naval architecture. When released, the bridge would drop onto Jerusalem's ramparts in seconds, creating a fighting platform 12 feet wide that would allow multiple assault troops to cross simultaneously while providing wooden protection against defenders positioned at the contact point. The engineering sophistication extended to details that reflected 2 years of hard-learned siege warfare experience. Leather curtains soaked in vinegar hung along the tower's sides, providing protection against Greek fire that had destroyed previous Crusader siege equipment. Wooden shutters could be adjusted to protect assault troops while allowing return fire. Their mechanisms operated by pull ropes that enabled rapid response to changing tactical conditions during the assault phase. As July 15th dawned with crushing Palestinian heat already building despite the early hour, both forces understood the tactical mathematics that would determine Jerusalem's fate. If the siege tower successfully reached the wall and deployed its assault troops, Crusader forces would fight from positions of overwhelming advantage against unprepared defenders. If the tower was destroyed during its final approach, the siege would continue for months more with steadily deteriorating prospects for Crusader success as supplies dwindled and casualties mounted from disease and enemy action. At dawn on July 15th, 1099, as church bells rang across the Crusader camp calling the faithful to morning mass, Godfrey's siege tower began its final approach toward Jerusalem's northeast wall on wheels wrapped in iron bands that had been forged in the smithies of Lorraine specifically for this campaign. The massive structure advanced with deliberate momentum, pushed by teams of 120 men positioned behind its protective wooden walls. Their combined strength required to overcome the tower's 4-ton weight across Palestinian terrain that shifted between rocky outcroppings and patches of loose soil that could trap wheels and halt forward progress. Every 20 feet, Gerard of Avesnes' engineers placed wooden planks cut from Lebanese cedar to prevent the iron-banded wheels from sinking into soft ground or catching on stones that could damage the carefully constructed wheel mechanisms. The tower's momentum, once established through coordinated pushing by the rope teams, became nearly unstoppable due to basic physics principles that medieval engineers understood through practical experience, rather than mathematical theory. The structure's mass created forward force that overcame most obstacles, while its height and weight provided stability against crosswind that might otherwise shift its direction during the crucial final approach. Defenders at Jerusalem's northeast wall faced the tactical nightmare that Iftikhar ad-Dawla had predicted but been unable to prevent. Where the original northwest target possessed 2,000 stockpiled stones within easy reach of defending archers, this section contained perhaps 200 hastily gathered projectiles, most weighing less than 10 pounds and lacking the mass necessary to damage reinforced wooden siege equipment. Where 3 mangonels had been positioned and calibrated for precise range at the prepared wall section, this northeastern position possessed only 1 siege engine, hastily repositioned during the night and still requiring range adjustments that consumed precious time while the tower approached. Most critically, the interior defensive barriers that would have channeled successful assault troops into prepared killing zones simply did not exist at this wall section. Defenders who successfully climbed onto the ramparts would face direct routes into Jerusalem's narrow streets, rather than being trapped between outer and inner defensive walls where concentrated archery and spear work could eliminate entire assault forces. The mathematical advantage that proper defensive preparation provided had been negated by Godfrey's tactical mobility, leaving Saracen defenders to improvise responses to siege warfare techniques they had not anticipated. As the tower approached within 50 yards of the wall, the height advantage that Gerard's precise construction had achieved became devastatingly apparent. Crusader crossbowmen positioned on the upper fighting platform could fire steel-tipped bolts down onto defenders while remaining largely protected behind wooden mantlets that deflected return fire. The angle of trajectory meant that Saracen arrows, fired upward from the ramparts, either struck the tower's sloped wooden roof and deflected harmlessly away, or were absorbed by thick oak planking reinforced with iron plates salvaged from damaged hauberks and helmets. The siege tower's engineering incorporated lessons learned during 2 years of Eastern Mediterranean warfare. Its height of 45 feet had been calculated with medieval precision to provide exactly 3 feet of advantage over Jerusalem's 42-foot walls, sufficient elevation for effective downward fighting, while avoiding the structural instability that would result from excessive height. When the tower's drawbridge mechanism deployed, Crusader knights would fight from higher ground with gravity adding force to their sword strikes, while defending themselves behind the bridge's wooden protection against spear thrusts from below. At midday, as the brutal July sun reached its crushing peak and Palestinian heat waves shimmered from Jerusalem's limestone walls, the siege tower made contact with the northeastern ramparts. Gerard of Avesnes operated the drawbridge mechanism personally, his 30 years of construction experience ensuring that the counterweight and pulley system he had designed using Flemish naval architecture principles would function flawlessly during the crucial deployment moment. The mechanism incorporated mathematical ratios that distributed the bridge's 1,200-pound weight across multiple support points, preventing structural failure that could trap assault troops on the tower's side of the gap. The drawbridge deployment created a wooden fighting platform, 12 feet wide, that spanned the gap between siege equipment and city wall, its oak planking thick enough to support the weight of multiple armored knights, while providing protection against spear thrusts from defenders positioned below the contact point. Iron brackets reinforced every joint in the bridge structure, while leather hinges allowed smooth deployment without the metal-on-metal grinding that could jam the mechanism during combat operations. Godfrey himself led the assault across the wooden bridge, his shield deflecting arrows that whistled through the superheated air while his sword remained ready for the close combat that escalade operations inevitably required. Behind him advanced his household knights, veteran warriors who had fought beside their duke since leaving Lorraine 3 years earlier for the expedition to the Holy Land. These men represented medieval warfare's professional corps, trained from childhood in weapons handling, experienced in siege operations across Anatolia and Syria, and disciplined enough to maintain formation during the chaos that characterized successful wall assaults. The first crusader to reach Jerusalem's ramparts was Leithold of Tournai, a Flemish knight whose battlefield experience included successful escalade operations at Nicaea and Antioch. Using techniques perfected through repeated siege warfare, he employed his kite-shaped shield to deflect a spear thrust from a Saracen defender, then drove his sword point through the gap in his opponent's lamellar armor where chest protection met shoulder guards. The strike penetrated between ribs to pierce the defender's heart, killing instantly through precise application of leverage and anatomical knowledge that veteran warriors acquired through years of close combat experience. Behind Leithold, additional Crusader assault troops poured across the drawbridge, their coordinated advance establishing a secure foothold on the wall section and beginning the systematic expansion of controlled territory that successful escalade required. These soldiers fought with weapons specifically chosen for confined space combat, short swords that would not become entangled in crowd fighting, battle axes capable of cutting through chain mail or wooden barriers with equal effectiveness, and reinforced helmets designed to deflect stones dropped from above by defenders positioned on higher wall sections. Within the first hour of contact, Jerusalem's northeast wall was in Crusader hands through overwhelming application of coordinated violence at the point where defenders were least prepared to resist. The tactical mathematics had proven decisive. Concentrated assault force attacking unprepared defenses achieved breakthrough with minimal casualties among the attacking troops. Within 2 hours, Crusader soldiers had fought through Jerusalem's narrow streets to reach the gate mechanisms, allowing the main army to pour into the Holy City that had withstood months of siege warfare but fell in a single day's assault. The siege of Jerusalem, which conventional medieval military doctrine suggested would require months of bloody attrition warfare with casualty rates exceeding 50% among attacking forces, ended through tactical innovation that transformed apparent impossibility into devastating success. Godfrey's nighttime maneuver had rendered weeks of defensive preparation useless, while creating conditions for rapid victory that chroniclers would document as one of medieval warfare's most brilliant tactical achievements. When Jerusalem's gates opened on July 15, 1099, and Crusader armies poured through streets that had seemed impossible to reach just hours before, the tactical implications of Godfrey's nighttime maneuver became immediately clear to every medieval commander who witnessed the result. The city that had withstood months of siege warfare fell in a single day, not through superior numbers or better equipment, But through engineering audacity that had rendered weeks of defensive preparation useless while creating conditions for rapid breakthrough, the conventional siege doctrine insisted was impossible to achieve. The immediate vindication was measured in concrete military terms. The chronicle accounts by Raymond of Aguilera and Fulcher of Chartres documented with systematic precision. Where conventional medieval siege warfare predicted months of assault against prepared defenses, with casualty rates often exceeding 50% among attacking forces, Godfrey's innovative approach achieved breakthrough in hours with fewer than 200 Crusader losses during the final assault phase. These casualties represented less than 10% of the assault force, a rate that medieval military mathematics suggested could only be achieved through overwhelming numerical superiority or catastrophic defensive failure. More significantly for the future of medieval warfare, the tactical innovation spread rapidly through European military circles as surviving commanders recognized the strategic implications of mobile siege equipment. Within a single decade, siege towers across the continent were being constructed with modular designs that allowed nighttime repositioning using techniques directly derived from Godfrey's Jerusalem operation. Master carpenters from Normandy to Byzantium began incorporating removable joining pins, reinforced wooden sledges, and cloth-muffled wheels into their siege equipment specifications, transforming siege warfare from static attrition operations into dynamic tactical maneuvers. The engineering principles proved themselves repeatedly during subsequent military campaigns across the Mediterranean and European theaters of operation. During the Second Crusade from 1147 to 1149, German engineers under Conrad III successfully moved siege equipment at Damascus, using methods that chroniclers explicitly attributed to studying accounts of Godfrey's Jerusalem maneuver. Richard I's siege engineers employed similar techniques during the Third Crusade, repositioning massive trebuchets under cover of darkness to achieve surprise attacks against Saladin's forces at Acre and Jaffa, demonstrating that the tactical mobility principle extended beyond siege towers to all categories of medieval siege equipment. The broader lesson extended beyond immediate military applications to challenge fundamental assumptions about medieval engineering limitations. Godfrey's success demonstrated that apparent impossibilities in siege warfare often reflected failure of imagination rather than genuine engineering constraints. The assumption that 4-ton wooden structures could not be moved once assembled had seemed so obviously true that no commander had seriously attempted systematic relocation using coordinated engineering methods and specialized equipment designed for the specific challenges involved. Medieval chroniclers understood the historical significance and recorded technical details with unusual precision rather than attributing victory to divine intervention or superior courage. They meticulously documented the tower's modular construction methods, the rope teams and roller systems that enabled movement, the timing and coordination required for successful execution. These accounts preserved engineering knowledge rather than romantic narratives, recognizing that future military commanders would need practical information about construction techniques and logistical requirements rather than inspirational stories about heroic achievement. The methods demonstrated effectiveness led directly to architectural innovations in defensive castle design that dominated European fortification development for the following 2 centuries. Castles built after 1100 featured round towers that eliminated blind spots where siege equipment could be positioned without detection, concentric walls that maintained defensive strength regardless of which wall section was breached first, and interior layouts that preserved coordinated resistance even when outer defenses were overcome through unexpected tactical approaches. Medieval military architecture evolved specifically to counter the tactical mobility that Godfrey had demonstrated was achievable through careful engineering and coordinated execution. Perhaps most importantly for medieval military development, the Jerusalem maneuver established a principle that influenced siege warfare tactics for centuries following the Crusader conquest. Apparent impossibility often masked untested solutions that could be implemented through systematic engineering analysis and coordinated application of available resources. The assumption that siege equipment could not be moved had prevented commanders from attempting relocation operations that were entirely feasible using medieval construction techniques, and organizational methods that were already well understood in other contexts, such as naval architecture and large construction projects. Modern military historians recognize the Siege of Jerusalem as a pivotal moment in the transition from static medieval siege warfare to the dynamic tactical operations that characterized later medieval and early Renaissance military campaigns. The shift from passive siege equipment deployment to active tactical mobility began with one commander's refusal to accept that conventional limitations represented unchangeable facts rather than problems that could be solved through innovative application of existing engineering knowledge and systematic coordination of available resources. The fundamental lesson remains as relevant for contemporary military operations as it was 9 centuries ago during the Crusader conquest of the Holy Land. When everyone assumes something cannot be accomplished, the commander who proves otherwise through systematic analysis and innovative implementation holds decisive tactical advantage. Medieval warfare taught that success belonged to those who solve practical problems through engineering intelligence rather than accepting conventional limitations as permanent constraints on military effectiveness. Godfrey of Bouillon's lasting legacy was not the conquest of Jerusalem itself, but his demonstration that medieval innovation could overcome any obstacle that seemed insurmountable when approached through systematic engineering analysis, careful planning, and coordinated execution of complex operations that challenged conventional assumptions about tactical possibilities. His success proved that the boundaries of medieval warfare were defined by imagination and engineering capability rather than by the apparent limitations that conventional military wisdom accepted as unchangeable facts governing siege operations and defensive strategy throughout the medieval period.